Good day, everyone. This is Hanney Seylim of Critical Faculty. Today, for the second time, I have the fantastic Professor Lawrence Krauss with me here. And today we will be discussing the fine-tuning dilemma. Hello, Professor Krauss. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing? It's nice to be with you, at least virtually. It looks like you're in outer space. I'm here on Earth.
Indeed. Yeah. We've been chatting a little bit off air and talking about this dilemma, or if there is such a thing, about the fine tuning. But I want to let you have a few words about this topic. And is it actually a controversial issue within the scientific community?
Well, it's certainly not as controversial as it's made out to be. I mean, let me point out. There are a lot of people who seem to think, try to convey the notion that this question of science and God is a pressing issue in science. I've been a professor for 40 years. I've never heard it once mentioned. I never heard the word God mentioned once, because you don't need it to discuss anything in science that I know of. So it's not a pressing issue. The question, what really people want to understand, is why the properties of the universe are what they are, what the forces and laws of nature are that are responsible for making them what they are. And when there's something surprising, it gets people interested. But there's never been a suggestion in the scientific community that any of the constants of nature that there's evidence that they were made that way so that we could be there. And I know that there are constants of nature, and I've used the term fine-tuning many years ago. There are some constants that are very surprising, and if they had different values, then life as we know it would not be here. But that doesn't imply any kind of design in the first place. Life is fine-tuned for the universe, not the other way around. Namely, if the constants of nature were different, there may be different kinds of life that could exist in those universes. It's not surprising that the kind of life we find on Earth is compatible with the laws of nature that allow that life to exist. It would be very surprising if life existed in a universe in which it couldn't exist. And so, just like life on Earth appears to be fine-tuned to the environment that it's in when you look around, and that led for a long time to the notion of intelligent design, we now understand that natural selection can easily and naturally produce a diversity of, not only a diversity of species, but it can produce life forms that look like they're perfectly tuned to their environment, because of course the ones that are better tuned reproduce, and we know, Darwin taught us about that. Well, cosmology has the same thing. Basically, the notion is, first of all, there are many different galaxies and many planets on different stars in different galaxies, and therefore it's not there's some selection effect. We don't find humans living on Mars, because humans couldn't live on Mars right now in the environment they're having. It's not too surprising they're found on Earth, because the conditions are ripe for that. But that doesn't especially since there are 8 or 9 planets, depending upon whether you like Pluto or not, and other dwarf planets. But we now know there are tons of solar systems. Almost every star has solar system around it, and there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and so. It's not too surprising that we find life existing on Earth the way it is, but we don't know whether there are other conditions under which life could exist in vastly different conditions around other stars, or whether similar conditions exist in any of those 100 billion solar systems in our galaxy. So that's the first sort of misconception about intelligent design and fine tuning. As I said, it's remarkable that that the universe seems so finely tuned for us, but the real understanding is that we're finely tuned for our universe. But more recently, I've discussed some other misconceptions. One of which is that there's one fundamental parameter in our universe that's really hard to understand. You can call it the cosmological constant, or the energy of empty space. And I was involved in some sense, discovering its existence in our universe. So it's of some interest to me. And the value of the energy of empty space, the fact that it's not zero, was a huge surprise to us. But the fact that it has the value it has from fundamental physics perspectives is extremely difficult to understand. The value is so small compared to anything we would have estimated if it wasn't zero. It's 120 orders of magnitude smaller than we might naively estimate. And one of the arguments that's been made is, well, if it were much larger, then galaxies wouldn't form, and then stars wouldn't form, and then planets wouldn't form, and people wouldn't form. And that's true. If it were much larger, then galaxies wouldn't have formed. But that, once again, that doesn't imply design. For example, there can be many universes. We now think the laws of physics suggest to us that there are likely many universes. And the energy of empty space could be different in each one. And then we would not be surprised to find ourselves living in a universe, once again, that we could live in. Also, as I said before, different life forms could exist in other universes that had different energies. But the other thing that people misunderstand is that it looks like that number is fine-tuned so we could be here. Well, it's much smaller than we might have imagined it. But as I just recently argued in a part of a podcast I do, presentation, if the number were exactly zero, which is what we thought it was before, it would be much more natural. And in fact, in such a universe in which that value of empty space was zero, more life could form like ours over longer time. So our universe isn't optimally designed in any case. It allows life like us, but it's not the optimal universe. And if you were a designer, the most sensible value for it would be zero. So if there was a designer of our universe, they weren't a very good designer.
Right. There are a couple of things here that I want to sort of discuss with you and probe in terms of energy that exists in empty space, no matter
Sure.
what you do. Even when you sort of empty all particles and all sort of energies,
Sure.
you still end up with residual energy. Does this suggest, and obviously with the energy law and conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created, does that suggest that nothing or nothingness doesn't actually exist, or probably never existed? There's always something.
No, it doesn't suggest that at all. Because in fact, the total energy of our universe, when you include the energy of empty space, it's quite possible, and in fact, if we go out and measure it, it's quite possible that the total energy of our universe is zero, which is a number you would expect if it came from nothing. And all evidence is that the total energy of the universe is zero. In fact, as I've said in a book I've written, that if you asked what would be the characteristics of a universe that arose from no space, no time, nothing, by properties of quantum mechanics and quantum gravity, and existed for 14 billion years or so, which is how long our universe has existed, if you asked what would be the characteristics of such a universe that came from nothing spontaneously, the characteristics would be precisely the characteristics of the universe we find ourselves living in. Now, that doesn't prove that's true, but it shows it's possible. So the fact that empty space has energy doesn't mean that the total energy of the universe is not zero, because gravity involves negative energy configurations too, and the two can add up, if you wish, to yield to total energy zero. And that's what many of us suspect the energy of our universe actually is, zero.
So some would argue then, wouldn't that breach the law of conservation of energy, because that suggests then that energy indeed has been created at some point?
No, not if it was zero. Not if it's zero today and it was zero then, right? Before, when there was nothing, there was no energy. You create a universe of zero total energy, is no energy. And then you create galaxies that have positive energy, but their gravitational attraction produces negative energy, if you want to call it that, and negative potential energy. And the two add up to zero, so everything works out fine. Now, it turns out the conservation of energy, as you just stated it, is kind of naive. It's classical and Newtonian. When you consider curved space, the definition of energy is different because general relativity is not Newtonian gravity. But the concept is basically the same. You can create a universe with zero total energy and not violate conservation of energy and not violate the fact of having a lot of stuff. You can, if you wish, as my friend Alan Guth once said, you can have the ultimate free lunch. You can create a universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars ultimately, from nothing, and it doesn't cost you anything.
One of the points our faithful friends, especially in the Muslim world, keep invoking is causality. They invoke the normal earthly causality of things happen. You decide for something to happen, you act upon it, and it happens, or consequences. And they can see that's sort of influenced by the arrow of time. and they're saying, well, they borrow from the Aristotelian first mover notion, and they go, well, there must be something outside of time and space that created it. Do you think?
Well,
Yeah. What do you think of time?
look, that's the
Was there
classical
time?
notion.
Yeah.
Well, the point is that the classical notions of things like that have already been shown in many cases by quantum mechanics. Our classical view of the world has been altered by understanding that the world at fundamental scales is different. So just because something seems natural to you doesn't mean it's right. Now, if general relativity has told us that space and time are tied together, space-time together, and if you spontaneously create space, then you spontaneously create time, if you wish. So time in our universe literally began at the Big Bang, if you want to call it that, if our universe spontaneously came into existence. So from that point of view, time itself did not exist, at least the time that we measure, did not exist before our universe was created. And then, so if time arose spontaneously, then the question of what happened before and what was the cause, those are not good questions. You have to change the way you think. Now, that may not be the case. It could be that our universe arose spontaneously in a meta universe containing, so a bubble that created our universe, the space that was our universe wasn't there, but suddenly it came into existence. And there may have been other things in existence, and maybe in that multiverse there's a global time variable that doesn't have to be. But none of that makes any difference. Our universe could spontaneously come into existence. And it's like, if you wish, it's like a bubble in boiling water. When water boils, you know that bubbles are going to form, but when and where a bubble forms is kind of a spontaneous process, affected by many conditions. In quantum mechanics, I have a light right beside me that's illuminating me. Well, I dump energy into that light, but the emission of photons is a completely, if you wish, random process. I know that if I dump energy in, then photons are emitted. But the photon that's shining on my face right now did not exist before it was created by the transition of some electron in an atom in that lamp, and there was no cause, if you want to call it that. I mean, it was spontaneous because quantum mechanics tells us it's spontaneous. So, the bottom line is, if time began at the beginning of the universe, then questions of causality go out the window, because you can't ask for cause and effect, and you can't ask for what happened before. It's just not a good question. Now, you may not like that, but the universe doesn't exist so you can like it. Sometimes questions are just not good questions once we learn the answers, or we learn how things work, and that was true for evolution. Now, we don't have all the answers yet, but we do know it's plausible that things can be spontaneously created, and you don't need a first mover. You don't need something to make it happen. It can just happen, and the laws of quantum mechanics allow that. We haven't proved for our universe that's what happened, although we've shown it's plausible. But just the fact that we don't know it doesn't mean, as I often say, lack of understanding is not evidence for God. It's just evidence of lack of understanding. So we don't yet have all the answers. But we do know it's plausible. In fact, it's more plausible, I would argue, than assuming an intelligent mover. Because the fact that the laws of physics allow spontaneous creation of universes, in principle, means that it's perfectly plausible that it can happen. And you don't have to invent anything else. You don't have to invent a new entity. Because the natural question is, okay, if there was an intelligent mover that created our universe, who created what created the intelligent mover? I mean, it's turtles all the way down.
Right. So away from the worlds of hypotheses, because there's so many of them, multiverse, M theory, have we actually observed that the notion of time and causality are a little bit distorted at the quantum level?
Well, look, we've learned that at the quantum level that the law that nature is governed by quantum mechanics. So we've learned that things happen spontaneously. That while the universe is deterministic on the whole, that observations and measurements indicate that if we know that if I have an atom of uranium, a nucleus of uranium, after a certain amount of time, it's likely to decay with the probability. But when it's going to decay is completely spontaneous, and there's nothing that determines when it decays, except we know that probabilistically, if we have a billion uranium atoms, they'll decay. The number that will have decayed over time will be governed by some law that we can describe exactly. But when each nucleus decays is completely random. Can't predict it. We don't know. It could be 1 year, it could be 10 billion years. And there's nothing that determines when each nucleus is going to decay. There's no, it's not, so that's an example of something that we measure every day.
So basically, we still don't know plenty, and the only problem is science would go, well, we don't know, let's find out. But then our friends would go, no, we don't know, and therefore.
Well, in fact, it's worse, I think. They argue, we know the answer. How they know the answer, no one tells. I mean, they say that the divine revelation, but they say, we know the answer, even before we've asked the questions. And science says, well, we don't have all the answers, but we try and find them out. And as far as we can see, there's no evidence yet for that the rules that we've developed break down, and that we need to go beyond it to supernatural explanations. So far, the universe can be understood completely without any supernatural shenanigans. And once again, that doesn't mean there isn't any, but there's no evidence for it. And that's why we never discuss God in physics meetings, because we've never needed to, because we can understand everything we've ever seen by natural laws that don't have anything supernatural. So not knowing is very exciting. And that's the sad thing for me, for the fundamentalists, because they claim to know everything from divine revelation, and that means there's nothing to learn. And most of what they know we've now shown to be wrong. But life is a process of learning, and the excitement of learning. We know so much more today than we knew yesterday, and certainly more than when I was a young person. And that progress of science is so exciting that I think it's sad that some people would rather tune it out and say, I don't want to know anything about the new things we're learning, because I know the answers from some 2,000-year-old book or 1,400-year-old book. It's sad for me.
Do you think, Professor Krauss, that time and space then are not really fundamental? They're more like side effects of that first inflation of singularity, and they're not really fundamental.
We don't know. I mean, time and space are the stage on which events happen. Space-time is the stage on which the events of our lives and all the events that take place in the observable universe happen. Are they fundamental, or in some sense do they not evolve isn't the word I was thinking. Do they emerge? Are they emergent properties from something more fundamental? We don't know the answer, but we're looking. We're trying to find out. That's what makes it exciting.
Well, I was remembering the physical constants. I think they were a lot more than what they are today. I think they're about 5 or 6. But the number keeps sort of shrinking. Do you think at some point that physical constant might end up with the one ultimate number that's going to rule them all?
Sort of like the Lord of the Rings. We hope that as we understand the universe on more and more fundamental scales, it gets simpler, and in some sense it does. But there's still the number of actual fundamental numbers that we don't understand, if you want to call it, are about 27 or so in the standard model, which explains everything we can see. But we're hoping that model as we look at more fundamental scales, can be understood in terms of a more unified model in which there may just be one fundamental constant or a few. We just don't know the answer, and we are trying to find out. So I'm agnostic about that.
When I was chatting to Dan Barker about the teleological argument, we stumbled upon something quite interesting. The God of the Bible and the Quran obviously claim to be living outside of space and time, and therefore not subject to causality. But whenever this particular entity utters anything or does anything, there is a will. Then even in the Quran, it says if God wants something to be, he would actually utter the word be, and then the thing comes to being. Doesn't that suggest sequence of events which must invoke time?
Well, it suggests many things. It suggests that God was created by humans in their own image, is what it suggests. Because all the gods we know of were created by humans, because they imagined what it would be like for it to have a divine entity, and that entity they colored with their own experience. The Greek gods were very different than Allah, or who's presumably different than Yahweh, and every different religion has colored their god or gods with their own as they wish. I particularly like the Greek gods because they had all the foibles of humans, and I found them more likable in that sense because they had jealousy and hatred and love and lust and all the things and so the Greek myths of gods were in some sense more interesting. But what surprises me often is that the scriptures talk about the deity as if the deity is a human being talking to humans, okay? But then whenever you confront them with the inconsistencies of the Bible or whatever, the answer is, well, we can't really comprehend what God is, and we really, we don't know the mind of God, so basically what they're saying is, well, we describe God this way, but when it doesn't work, we don't understand it,
Yeah.
God works in mysterious ways is equivalent to saying none of it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, right on cue, Professor Krauss, because we just got a comment here from one of our faithful friends. He said, "This is our head limitations. Our God has no limitations, Mr. Hanney." So basically, unfalsifiable. It's there. You can't.
Well, I mean, the question is, the only question I would ask is, how do they know? How do they know God has no limitations? And what evidence is it? And what does it mean to have no limitations? So I guess I don't really understand the when people make those claims, they're fine to make those claims, but what evidence do they have for it?
Right. So do you reckon really at the end of the core of it, it's a problem of epistemology? One that suggests faith as the best way to know what we should know, and one that it doesn't have any preperceived sort of notions. You follow the steps and let nature guide you to the right solution.
Well, I guess so. I try not to use fancy words like epistemology, but you're right. I mean, the point is that the difference between science and faith, if you want it, is that one forces the universe to conform to your beliefs, and the other forces your beliefs to conform to the universe.
Indeed. I mean, are we ever going to grow out of that notion that we need to have a big brother that looks after us? Are we ever going to take responsibility?
Who knows? I mean, I don't make those kind of predictions. I think there are many evolutionary reasons why humans have a predilection to create religions. Many ones. To look for purpose, and also a universe that may not seem fair. I mean, and to hope that there's someone looking after us. There's lots of reasons to understand why religion is ubiquitous in human life, and whether we can overcome those, I don't know. I suspect in some ways no, that it's so hardwired that it's because I notice even in some groups where organized religions themselves have faltered, you get secular religions where people begin to believe things about gender or race or whatever else that again become sacred in their own mind, and that they believe there are oppressors that may or may not exist, that there are saviors that may or may not exist. So I think we tend naturally to try and do that. And that's why we need science. Because science was developed and turns out to work to overcome that natural human bias, that natural human desire to believe. And science, the process of science overcomes the natural human tendency to think what happens to you is significant, to ignore the data that doesn't agree with you, and all of the rest. And science has worked. And I was going to say miraculously, I shouldn't use that word here. But remarkably, science has taken us forward so that you and I can have this conversation on other sides of the world, and so science works. I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah. In my recent conversations with a couple of Muslims, there were actually two scientific questions have arisen, and they're to do with cosmology. So I want to run them by you and see what's your opinion. One gentleman wanted to invoke time, and God's sort of outside of time, and God can command time to stop. And he claimed that at the event horizon, just before you enter a black hole, that actually time stops completely. And I argued that no, that doesn't happen. It actually just slows down significantly.
It doesn't even do that.
Yeah.
What I mean, if I'm watching you fall into a black hole, it looks to me like time has stopped completely for you. In my frame, you freeze at the event horizon of the black hole. But when you're falling through the black hole, your watch is ticking like normal. So, because time isn't universal in general relativity, it's local.
Right.
It depends on the local configuration. So it is true that time appears to stop at the event horizon of a black hole, but that's only if you're watching from the outside and you're watching someone fall in. As I say, for someone falling in, there's no signpost saying event horizon here, and their watch can be ticking like normal, and until they get to a much closer to the singularity where they get squished or spaghettified, they may be having a happy, and it is in a supermassive black hole. The event horizon, the gravity at the event horizon of a black hole can be small enough that it wouldn't even kill you.
Right. And the other thing was obviously the conservation of information, because it was argued, and I think Stephen Hawking came up with the solution for this, that energy and information, once it gets sucked in by a black hole, it gets destroyed, and that will breach the conservation of information. But then on the event horizon, the radiation comes back and it's supposed to emit back the information at atomic level.
Well, I actually don't think we yet understand the answer to that question. It is a puzzle, because it is true that classically the information is destroyed, and there have to be quantum effects. And lots of people claim to have solved that problem, but I'm skeptical.
Interesting.
So it's fun to have problems that aren't solved, at least if you're a scientist. If you're religious, it's not fun to not understand things, but for a scientist, it's really fun.
Yeah. There is a verse in the Quran that Muslims use quite a lot to prove God's cosmological prowess, by saying, well, we knew about the expansion of the universe, because there's a Quranic verse that talks about God expanding the universe. And this is one thing I want to ask you and understand from you. Does space actually get created because of the dark energy and the rate of expansion? Or is it because of the physical things within the universe that is sort of spreading away, create space on its way, like the singularity did at some point?
Neither is right. Space isn't created. As the universe expands, space just expands. When I blow up a balloon, I'm not creating a balloon. The balloon is just stretching. There's no new atoms in the balloon. The balloon is just stretching. When space expands, space expands. And we don't think of it as creating space so much as just space. The distance between different objects gets larger, and that's driven by the matter and energy within the universe. General relativity tells us this is why general relativity is more complex than Newtonian gravity, because in Newtonian gravity you have a gravitational field and matter, like by the Earth, and matter responding to it. But what happens here is that matter, the nature of space-time determines the motion of matter, but the motion of matter determines the characteristics of space-time. And there's this feedback, and that makes general relativity much more complicated than Newtonian gravity. Yeah. But so the properties of space and time are determined by the configuration of matter and energy within space-time. But the configuration of matter and energy within space-time evolves based on the properties of space-time. Okay?
Yeah, no, I get that. It's quite interesting. It's very strange, because the early conditions, obviously the world, the universe was a lot more dense, but as it expands, you would expect a bit of things to get a bit diluted.
Well, they are. The distance between galaxies is growing, so the density of matter is going down as 1 over the cube of the size of the universe, as you would expect. Okay, what's wrong with that? But the space is the stuff between matter. Matter is just like little test points that are measuring for us what's happening in the space around us. But yes, our early universe was incredibly dense. and now it's much less dense. That happens as it expands, but that's okay. Just like if you want to think about it, if I blow up the surface of the balloon, the matter density on the surface of the balloon is decreasing because at the same time, because there's a fixed amount of material and it's occupying a much bigger area.
Do you think, Professor Krauss, that the notion of obviously, I really think that the God of the Bible and the God of the Quran cannot exist by definition. There are issues with logic in there, but is there a possibility there might be a super entity that we yet to discover? And is it you open the door just in case?
Well, I don't open the door. And look, I can't say that there aren't unicorns wandering around on Earth somewhere that no one's seen either. But there's no evidence for it, and all the evidence we have suggests it's highly unlikely. But science can't disprove the existence of something that it can't ever test. You can look for clues. And all the clues right now suggest that such a thing isn't necessary. So as a famous mathematician once said to Napoleon, when he asked where God was in his equations, he said, "I have no need of that hypothesis." And the point is, we
Laplace.
can, and Laplace, and we have no need of that hypothesis. So we can proceed to understand the universe, and we haven't had to have recourse to it. But that doesn't prove it doesn't exist. But, as I say, I can't prove that, unicorns don't exist or leprechauns or other things. If you tell me that they never can be seen when you're where they are, and they never can have an effect that I can measure, then how the heck can I disprove them?
Right.
It's just most of us would say, well, it's highly unlikely. I've never seen a leprechaun or a unicorn or in my closet or under the bed. And since I haven't and no one else has, probably it's an invention of in someone's mind.
Yeah. Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Huxley, coined the term agnostic, and I believe it was Stephen Jay Gould who said the non-overlapping magisteria between the two entities, the God and no God notion, and it somehow suggests the partition in the human brain. Brilliant people like Isaac Newton, he came up within 18 months with the most brilliant human harvest, inventing multiple things, all the way to the gentleman who knelt on his knees and accepted Jesus Christ. I think he's the director of the Genome Project.
Francis Collins.
Francis Collins, yeah. How do you explain that? How does it work?
Well, look, people can. We are human. We can all believe in 10 impossible things at any moment, and we have no problem believing in two totally contradictory things at the same time. We are not purely rational, and reason is the slave of passion, as Hume, I think, once said. So look, people are people. And, we all have our foibles. And so the fact that some great scientist believes something nutty, that's, as I say, some scientists are Republicans, some are Democrats. I mean, it takes all kinds, but it doesn't prove anything. It just proves that the scientists can do one thing well, and then in their rest of their lives they can be different. And so humans, we all have to, in some way or another, as I've often said, have to believe 10 impossible things before breakfast, because you have to believe that you love your job or your family or something just to get out of bed in the morning.
Well, it's often been argued that the fine-tuning argument is the best, even by some atheists. I think Lawrence Krauss said it. Sean Carroll said it at some point, I think, with his debates with William Lane Craig, that the fine-tuning is the best possible argument the faithful has because it plays by the rules, but it's still a horrible one.
Well, I don't know. I don't like the way that's framed, but maybe it's because I'm not impressed with a lot of Carroll's arguments. But I think I don't know if fine tuning is the best argument. I think it appears to be the most scientific argument, but it fails like all the other scientific arguments. So. I think their argument that we don't. The people who throw up their hands and say the Lord works in mysterious ways and I don't understand it, but I believe in God, are probably just as honest as those people who try and use science to to try and pretend to justify their God. And St. Augustine said it a long time ago, the Bible isn't a scientific document. Moses Maimonides said, he claimed the Bible is absolutely true, but if your interpretation of the Bible differs with the results of science, you should re-examine your interpretation of the Bible. And I think ultimately people want to believe. And there are some people who try to pretend that science, they continue to find whole gaps where science allows God. But as you know, those gaps keep decreasing. So there's a great danger in trying to use science to justify the existence of God. Because once we find, if there's a mystery we don't understand, once we solve that mystery, where does God go? And so for those people who try and hide God in the gaps in our scientific knowledge, it's a dangerous game. Because once those gaps go away, then what do you do with God?
So if I'm reading this correctly, there isn't really a best argument for the existence of God. It's rather humans' thirst and hunger for knowledge and their inability to answer them in their living conditions or in their lifetime. They're so desperate to find answers, and this is a very easy way to give answers.
Well, I don't. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're being kinder. I think it's even worse. I think people. It's not a thirst for knowledge. A thirst for knowledge would lead to science. I think it's a fear. It's ultimately a fear of a dangerous, dark universe that doesn't care about you. First of all, and a hope. It's fear and hope, and an unwillingness often to follow things through to their logical conclusion. Often, saying God did it is just an excuse for not wanting to think.
So how does one then, in void of purpose, basically by a super entity, the fact that everything is going towards annihilation, how can we avoid despair? How, as human beings, and find solace in ourselves and fellow humans?
Well, I think we make our own meaning. The universe may have no meaning, but we are fortunate. Look, how can you not be excited by the fact that we live in this amazing universe and we've evolved brains and consciousness that allow us to understand a large part of it and communicate to each other and experience all the things that humans communicate. There's no cause for despair. There's cause for excitement. We should be joyous and excited by the fact that we're here, and it's precious. The fact that we have a brief time on this earth, each of us, doesn't mean it's not worth. There's no point. The point is to experience that everything you can about the universe and life in that brief time. It makes life more precious, not less precious.
Right. Professor Krauss, I want to end up with this because I believe we're coming close to the 45 minutes we've agreed on. Your debate with Hamza, that I believe the Greek Muslim dude.
Yeah.
Have you noticed anything different?
What was that?
Have you noticed anything different in the Muslim arguments to that of the Christian or?
No. The one time I was with him, it was like I was with a Muslim version of William Lane Craig. It was exactly the same stuff. Exactly the same stuff. On the whole, except the difference, I think, was that and I think it's because Islam is a younger religion than Christianity. Even William Lane Craig, though he's an extreme case, is unlikely to take does not take every admonition of the Bible seriously. Like stone your children if they disobey you. Okay. The difference that I find in Islam is because it's younger. I think people take everything much more literally. Even the Christian apologists don't tend to take everything in the Bible literally, and I think that's the only difference. But the logical arguments, the arguments used to try and make it appear as if the religion is scientific, were identical, and they were. I don't know who stole them from who, but I suspect Hamza stole them from William Lane Craig, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was more, in some sense, more emotional in that regard. But there were no. Other than that, there were no real differences. I think William Lane Craig probably is smoother, maybe smoother, but for the Muslim people in the audience, maybe they found Hamza more palatable. I just don't know.
Yeah, no, I actually totally agree, because if you go back 6 centuries, Christianity was a lot more literal than today.
Exactly.
So
if you go back to the 1400s, people were getting stoned and killed for exactly those reasons, and then we grew out of it. And I suspect and hope that if Islam is still around in 6 centuries, that it will have become the sort of the kinder, gentler version of itself, in the sense that people say, we didn't, okay, those things they used to think were, stone people or this or that. We know better now. Because ultimately for most people, they're not. Most people just pick and choose from their religion the things they like and the things they don't like, and they throw out the things they don't like and keep the things they like, and they call that their religion.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some inside stuff right now. In the Muslim world, there's a huge movement. It's called the Quran only, or Quranism, where they're getting rid of all the hadith, all the stupid stuff, and even the verses in the Quran were chopping hands of the thief. So the cutting the hands of the thief now is being interpreted as stopping thieves from stealing. Stoning doesn't mean stoning. It's happening. It's happening.
Well, that's good. I mean, I guess that's progress, I suppose. And so that's good to hear. I'm glad you're leaving me with something good to feel that there's progress. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, are there any final words you want to sort of tell people around here that is the fine tuning, is that word means anything in the context of the maybe so many different parameters, and there's just the one that happened to be the one. So is the word fine tuning here makes sense in your opinion?
Well, it depends what you mean by fine tuning. If a value that we measure for the universe seems highly unusual, and if it were radically different, then we might not be here. It looks like there's some tuning. Where the tuning is happening, whether it's in life or the universe, is different. So using the word is okay, I guess, except it's misinterpreted greatly. And I guess what I'll say in the end is that the Earth seems fine-tuned, as I say, for us to be in it. And we're doing an experiment right now to see what happens if we change that tuning. It's called climate change. And that's why my new book is called The Physics of Climate Change, because we're going to see how well life is tuned to the Earth when the Earth changes.
Thank you, Professor Krauss. I'm going to put a link, guys, to Professor Krauss's new book in the description. So I'm going to look at it myself and have a read. I'd like to thank you again for appearing for the second time, helping the Middle East coming out of darkness. And I believe you got an interview in 15 minutes. So thank you so much.
Have another one. Well, it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope it's worthwhile, and I'll be happy to come back again sometime.
Fantastic. I will translate this episode in Arabic. I'm going to have it subtitled, and I'll send it to you so you can spread the word.
Yeah, okay. So the word will be the word. Okay, wonderful. Fantastic. Okay, you take care. Okay.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in a couple of days' time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.